Welcome back to Recreation Rendezvous at the junction of nature and play. I am Julie Ramey, the Community Relations Manager of the City of Bloomington, Indiana Parks and Recreation Department, here in the podcast studio today with a very special guest, our urban forester, Haskell Smith.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast studio, Haskell. Now, urban forestry, in a broad sense, is managing trees in the city. So when people think of forests, they think of great vast expanses of trees, or maybe here in Indiana, you've been down to the Hoosier National Forest or one of our state parks or state forests and seen lots and lots of trees. Well, urban forestry in Bloomington, in a city, is a little bit different, and Haskell is here today to talk with us about some threats to our urban forest, namely, right now, a vicious little insect that is invasive, and a very beautiful insect called the spotted lanternfly. Lovely insect, but really detrimental to tree populations. So, Haskell, tell us a little bit about this insect known as the spotted lanternfly and why we're worried about it.
So the spotted lanternfly is another invasive pest in the long lists that have kind of come over from Asia and will cause an insane amount of damage to certain plants, namely grapevines, the big one right now that folks are seeing the most damage on, but it can feed on up to 70 different species. It's a plant-sucking insect, so it feeds off the sap of trees. The sap flows through its body very quickly. It excretes it and creates a sticky substance known as honeydew. And then from there, the honeydew molds, and then it turns to sooty mold, and that prevents trees from their performing photosynthesis as well as they should.
So does it take a lot of spotted lanternflies? And I guess first have to say that the spotted lanternfly is technically a moth, and that there's probably several stages in its development. Is it every stage that we're worried about?
The big one is the instar where it's feeding the moth, and that's where it reproduces. It builds up over time, so if we eradicate the initial wave of them, the chance of them building a large population to cause vast damage is less likely.
You mentioned there are 70 different species of trees and sounds like woody plants and vines that could potentially be impacted by the spotted lanternfly. You mentioned grapevines. Pretty serious stuff when we talk about the wineries around town, things like that. From an urban forestry standpoint, are you looking for signs of this insect on maple trees and things like that?
So we use another invasive tree as an indicator, what's called tree of heaven or Ailanthus altissima. It's their favorite tree. They co-evolved in Asia. So that's the main food source they look for. That's where they first move in. That's where they build their population before they spread out to attack other things in search of more food. It's not real detrimental to that tree, unfortunately, but once it spreads to grapevine and maple and walnut, even some of our local crops such as corn and soybean can be affected. There's not a lot of great information out there just yet on how detrimental it is and what, the specific dollar amounts on what damage it's caused on the East Coast. I think the studies are still ongoing. It has potential for those mostly in that aspect. As far as the urban forest is considered, I'm not that worried about it. I think it'll cause some stunting of growth in trees, maple primarily. They're already kind of stunted from drought, but I don't see it being anything like emerald ash borer, where it just completely kills an entire species.
I'm glad you mentioned the emerald ash borer because a decade ago, that was the species of primary concern, the insect that had pretty much flew down to Indiana from the northern states, moved in firewood and wooden pallets, things like that, and pretty much killed every ash tree that it could find. And Parks and Recreation actually treated some of its bigger ash trees. At Bryan Park comes to mind. There were some larger ash trees in Bryan Park. Is the threat of emerald ash borer past now in the year 2025?
No, unfortunately, the original science of EAB moving through as a wave wasn't quite right. So it kind of follows every other population. It's a wave. It has peaks and valleys. So it's always going to be there. We're kind of reevaluating our long-term ash plans currently, but we still treat 250 ash trees, and I think we have about 650 left throughout the city. And it's usually on a 2 to 3 year cycle with imamectin, benzoate. It's a tree injection.
A tree injection, so we're not spraying anything. We're actually putting a chemical into the tree itself. So when the emerald ash borer goes to feed, that's what impacts its life cycle and ideally removes it, right?
Yep. It's a systemic pesticide, so it's injected at the trunk of the tree based on the diameter of the tree, and it absorbs throughout the tree. And when the larvae go to feed on the cambium of the tree, which is what ultimately kills the tree, it kills them instead.
Well, it makes a lot of sense that we're trying to preserve some of our larger ash trees, but in relation to this new pest, the spotted lanternfly, we are not necessarily trying to save its primary host tree that is this invasive tree of heaven. So first off, tell us how you identify a tree of heaven. How do you know if you have one in your yard?
Usually fast growth. They can grow up to 6 foot in a year. They look similar to a walnut, except for on the leaf, the leaflets usually have one at the very tip. If you crush a leaf, it just smells bad. I think it's a very unpleasant smell. Smooth bark, it's probably a poor description, but
does it grow well and I'm trying to think of where I've seen it, and the first thing that comes to mind, and now that I know what it looks like, I see it a lot of places, but along the roadside in a fence row, I think I've seen lots of tree of heaven.
Yeah, it'll grow anywhere, and that's just kind of the invasive quality in it, is that it will find and spread its roots to find the nutrients it needs to grow anywhere.
And it's probably important to mention in as we're talking with our urban forester, Haskell Smith, here in Bloomington, Indiana, that while we're very concerned about invasive species, insects, and trees and plants, that the city of Bloomington can't actually come to your house and remove trees for you or things like that, because we manage trees on public land. So if you have a tree in front of your house that's in the right of way, or that we've been talking about trees in our public parks, that's the primary function of urban forestry. The urban forestry program here in the city of Bloomington is to manage those public trees. So where can people go for help to manage trees that appear on their private land or in their own yards?
MC Iris, Monroe County Reduce Invasive Species Initiative, has a lot of valuable resources on their website. I believe they're still offering a rebate for removing invasive trees and potentially free replacements during their plant sale here in the next month or so.
So MC Iris, Monroe County Identify and Reduce Invasive Species, and you can find them online at mciris.org, and lots of resources there. And probably you can talk to Google too, right? And do a quick picture on your phone to try to identify invasive species. So just talking about the threats to urban forestry, especially when it comes to spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven. What's your, in a couple sentences, Haskell, what's your short-term and long-term plan for identifying, managing, controlling, if that's not too strong of a word, spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven, sort of this double whammy of invasive species?
It's a tricky process. Just based on tree of heaven itself, it's a wildly resilient species. Like we mentioned, it'll grow through a sidewalk crack. So part of it of removing those is herbicide treatment to prevent root sprouting. So that's a key in it. We're identifying the ones that we have inventoried to treat the females before we remove them, because if you just cut them down, they resprout like crazy, and then you've compounded your problem. Also, we only have so much resources. We only have 8 hours in the day, X amount of dollars in the budget, and I have 25,000 trees to worry about. So good with the bad and trying to manage everybody's expectations. Don't expect us to come in and clear cut every tree of heaven in the city on public land, but we're currently identifying the female of the species to limit seed spread, treating those, and we'll remove them as they decline, unless they're in over somebody's house to where we have to remove them and then treat the stump, in hopes that we can reduce the spread of them, and then we can leave a couple of the male trees in high potential areas for where we'll see the spotted lanternfly move in. One that I've talked with Will Drews with the DNR is on near the stadium, because there's so many folks from in and out of town all over, and one of the things that spotted lanternfly will hitchhike on trucks and cars, and they'll lay their egg sacs, and they just look like a little splotch of dirt, and that's how they get spread. Train stations are another one, so along the train tracks are another area that we're watching.
Wow. So keep an eye on your vehicles, boats, trailers, campers, wagons, anytime you're moving from one place to another, especially if there's a known population of spotted lanternfly. But the elephant in the room, how on earth do you tell a male from a female tree of heaven?
It flowers in the summer.
Well, there you go.
They're flowered right now.
And what do the flowers look like?
They're yellowish, pale yellowish, in kind of clusters. Again, just walking by, you might think it's a walnut tree with some weird yellowish flowers, but that's probably a female tree of heaven.
Well, Haskell, thank you so much for taking the time to join us in the podcast studio today to talk about spotted lanternfly, tree of heaven, the emerald ash borer, and other invasive species that threaten our urban forest, the health and well-being of our urban forest. So if you want more information about urban forestry in Bloomington and the services that the urban forestry team provides for the benefit of the city and public land, you can go to bloomington.in.gov/treecare. And that's a clearinghouse website. Lots of FAQs, has access there to our tree care manual to give great advice and guidance for how to manage trees and woody vegetation on your own private land. Haskell, thanks so much for being in the podcast studio with us today.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to Recreation Rendezvous. Find the podcast wherever you download your favorite podcast to learn more about Bloomington Parks and Recreation and more of our urban forestry and other products and services that the Parks Department provides. For now, I'm Julie Ramey, the Community Relations Manager for Bloomington Parks and Recreation here in the podcast studio with Caleb Poor, our audio engineer who makes all these podcasts sound amazing. Until next time on Recreation Rendezvous, have a great summer and get out and enjoy your parks out in the city.